It started with a silence I couldn't explain. No slam of the door, no final words, just the shifting weight of a man who stopped touching me in the dark, who stopped calling me beautiful in the mornings, who began coming home with the smell of shampoo I didn't own clinging to his collarbones. And I told myself it was the pressure at work, the deadlines, the stress. Until one night he stayed out and didn't come back until noon the next day with no apology, just a shrug and a soft lie that didn't bother being clever. And somewhere deep in the hollows of my ribcage I knew even before the truth arrived, raw and brutal and wearing my sister's lipstick, that the man I gave 5 years of my life to had left me without moving out. He had simply slid into a parallel life with someone who shared my blood, someone who once painted her nails with me on Sunday afternoons, someone who held my hair when I vomited after heartbreaks and told me I deserved better. And now here she was taking the man who once promised me Paris, who once held my face like it was the most fragile, sacred thing in the world. And I didn't scream, I didn't cry, not at first. I just stared at the empty space in our closet, at the half-made bed he never returned to, at the photos on the fridge I hadn't taken down yet. And then came the text from my mother, casual and devastating. "Did you know your sister and Mark are together? Thought you might have known. Just wanted to make sure you're okay." And that's when I broke. Not in public but quietly, privately, the kind of break that rearranges your bones and rewrites your memories. And for 3 weeks I didn't leave the apartment, just watched the same movies on loop, the kind where women rise from ashes and walk into the fire laughing. And I started to collect every trace of their affair, their betrayal, because something inside me snapped in a way that didn't bleed. It calcified, became sharp and cool and still. And when I finally saw the wedding photos posted by a cousin who hadn't meant harm, just wanted to show off her dress, I stared at them like crime scene evidence, zooming in on the smiles, on my sister's smirk, on Mark's hand curled possessively around her waist the way he used to hold me when we'd fall asleep watching storms. And something in me clicked, like a locked drawer opening, and I found myself building a folder, digital at first. Then printed on glossy paper, photos of them kissing at the altar, him whispering into her ear, dancing with champagne glasses, laughing with men in suits who didn't know or didn't care what he'd done to me. And that's when I found his boss's email, buried in one of the corporate newsletters Mark used to forward to me when he was proud of his promotions. And I remembered the company policy. No workplace fraternization, no dishonesty in disclosures, no conduct that could damage reputation or trust. And I knew for a fact that my sister had interned there last year. And I knew for a fact that Mark was still under review for a position in senior management. And I didn't think. I just acted, because there are moments in life where justice isn't a courtroom or a dramatic slap in public. It's a quiet click of send at 2:38 a.m. with a subject line that reads, "Professional Conduct Concerns. Mark Wallace," and an attached zip folder titled Wedding_Truth. And I didn't wait for a reply, didn't refresh my inbox, just went to bed with a stillness I hadn't felt in months. And when I woke up the next day, there was silence again, not the kind that signals abandonment, but the kind that precedes impact. And by noon I received a message from an unknown number. "What did you do?" Followed by another. "You ruined everything." And I smiled just slightly, because I hadn't ruined anything. I had simply turned the lights on and let the roaches scatter. And in the days that followed, word trickled in through mutual friends, through cryptic Facebook statuses and quickly deleted Instagram stories. Mark had been called into HR, an internal investigation was underway, and my sister had been removed from a shortlist for a permanent role. And I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow, like a song finally ended. And in that silence I packed my bags, booked a flight, and left the city where my love had died, where betrayal wore a familiar face. And I found myself in a quiet town by the coast where no one knew my name, where I could walk barefoot on sand and scream into the sea and laugh like a madwoman with no one watching. And I thought about all the versions of me that had to die to become this one. The one who doesn't need revenge to survive but took it anyway. Because sometimes you need to burn the house down, not for warmth, but so no one else can live in the ruins. And as months passed I started writing again the way I used to before I met him, before my sister became a stranger in my story. And I wrote not about love but about endings, about the beauty of collapse, about the quiet power of choosing yourself in a world that expects women to swallow pain like it's communion. And maybe one day he'll tell a different story, one where I was bitter or unstable or cruel. But I know the truth. I was the consequence he never thought would come, the ghost who stopped waiting and started watching, the woman who turned her grief into ammunition and walked away not with scars, but with her spine straight and her heart clean. And maybe, just maybe, that's what real power looks like. Not forgiveness, not forgetting, but remembering exactly what happened and choosing to rise anyway, choosing to never let it happen again, choosing you even when the world hands you nothing but broken pieces of trust wrapped in family ties. And as the waves crash against the rocks and the wind tangles my hair, I sit with peace, not the gentle kind but the earned kind. The kind that comes after fire. I should have known from the way he looked at her at dinner that night, a flicker too long, a softness too reserved for strangers, but I told myself I was tired, paranoid, overly sensitive from the stress of moving into the new apartment and all the late nights he spent at work. At least that's what he said, and I didn't question the way she started coming around more often, claiming she was just checking on me, even when I didn't ask, even when I started to feel like a guest in my own home. Listening to the two of them laugh in the kitchen over wine I didn't pour, jokes I wasn't in on, and I didn't say anything the day I found her hair clip in our bedroom, gold with 3 little pearls. Delicate like her lies, sitting on the floor just beside the bed we used to make love in like we believed in forever. Because confrontation felt like standing on the edge of a cliff with no parachute. What if I was wrong? What if I was crazy? What if I said it out loud and he looked me in the eye and told me I was everything he couldn't stand anymore? So I kept it in, swallowed it like poison and let it eat me from the inside out until the day I came home early, flowers in hand, planning to surprise him with dinner reservations and maybe a second chance for whatever we'd lost, only to find the door unlocked and my sister's coat on the hook and 2 glasses of red wine half drunk on the counter, and I stood there frozen while I heard the laughter from the bedroom and something in me cracked. Not loud, not violent, just a soft internal fracture that would never quite heal. And I didn't scream, didn't interrupt, I just turned around, walked out the door and sat in my car with the flowers in my lap until they wilted into a silence I didn't recognize. And when he texted me the next day to say, "We need to talk," I simply replied, "No, we don't," and blocked his number, hers too, and for weeks I lived in a fog. Unable to sleep, to eat, to exist without picturing them together in the bed I bought, in the home I built, and friends said things like, "You'll move on, they're not worth it," but they didn't know what it was like to be betrayed not just by the man you loved but the girl you once shared a bunk bed with. The girl who braided your hair before school dances, who cried in your arms when her first boyfriend cheated, and now she had stolen the one person I let see me entirely, and I wanted to forgive, to forget, to heal like a normal person. But healing doesn't come easy when no one says sorry. When they act like it just happened, like love is an accident you trip into, and then a year later an invitation arrived, not addressed to me but slipped under my door by accident from a neighbor maybe, or a cruel god, I'll never know. But there it was, thick and cream-colored with their names embossed in gold. Mark and Isabel, inviting whoever was lucky enough to receive it to their sacred day, and I stared at it until the letters blurred and my hands shook with a rage I had buried so deep I thought it was dead, and something inside me whispered, "You don't have to be the bigger person. You just have to be precise." And so I watched, I waited. Screenshots of his old messages, emails about office policies, photos of them in bars on nights he claimed to be in meetings, and then I saw it. An Instagram reel posted by one of their friends, casually tagged, quickly deleted, but not before I downloaded it. A video of their wedding day, her in white lace, him in a suit I picked out years ago, smiling like guilt doesn't exist, and that was all I needed, because revenge, real revenge, doesn't come from hatred, it comes from grief that's grown teeth. And I opened my laptop, wrote the email like a legal brief, factual, calm, with attachments labeled professionally. No anger, no insults, just truth wrapped in evidence, and I sent it to his boss, his boss's boss, and the ethics committee of the company he once boasted about joining, and I closed my laptop with a serenity I hadn't felt since the day before they ruined me. And for weeks I heard nothing. Until I received an anonymous tip from someone on the inside. "Your message made waves. He's under investigation." And I didn't respond, didn't gloat, didn't post vague quotes on Instagram about karma. I just bought myself dinner, alone for the first time in months, dressed in red, and sat at a table for 2 without shaking, and I toasted to nothing, to no one. Just the quiet freedom of a woman who no longer needs permission to be cold, to be calculated, to be dangerous in a world that tried to make her docile. And though the world moved on and the story faded and they probably told their own version to friends, how I was jealous, unhinged, bitter, I didn't care, because the truth is this: I gave everything to a man who wanted more and knew. And he thought I'd crumble when he chose my sister, thought I'd disappear into shame, but instead I became something they can never touch again. And every time they see my name, feel a phantom of guilt in their stomachs, Wonder if I'll show up again in a whisper, in a reference check, in a new city where they think they're safe. I won't, I'll be too busy building a life so full of fire they'll have to squint to look at it. A life they'll never be invited to, a story they can't rewrite, and maybe one day I'll tell someone about it all, a new love if I ever allow one in again. And he'll ask why I smile like that when someone mentions betrayal, and I'll say, because I know how to bury what hurts without letting it rot, because I know how to burn someone down without striking a single match. And he'll understand or he won't, and either way I'll be fine, because I've already survived the worst thing I ever let happen to me, and I did it with grace sharpened into a blade. There are moments you think you'll never survive. Moments that rupture time into a before and after. And for me it was a Tuesday afternoon when I opened a message. I was never meant to see a single photo, blurry, intimate, almost tender, of my sister leaning into him at what looked like a rooftop bar. Her hand grazing his thigh, his smile familiar and foreign all at once. And I remember blinking at the screen, blinking again as if I could will the pixels into lying. But they never did, and in that quiet second I felt something inside me dissolve. Not explode, not break, just dissolve like sugar in hot tea. Gone before you realize it, and the world didn't tilt or scream or pause, it just kept turning, the hum of the fridge, the neighbor's dog barking, the thump of my own pulse reminding me that yes, this is real, this is now, this is happening to you. And what stung wasn't the betrayal. Not entirely, it was the absurdity of it, the cliché of being left for someone else, and worse, being left for your own sister. As if my life had been reduced to a bad soap opera, as if I had become some character. Too naive to know how the story ends, and the truth is I had known something was wrong, I just didn't want to believe it, because belief is a dangerous thing. It keeps you warm long after the fire's gone out, keeps you hopeful when hope is just a prettier word for denial. And in the weeks that followed I didn't cry, not really. I walked through the motions of my life like a ghost, still learning the rules of haunting, brushing against memories I couldn't kill and silences I couldn't bear. And she didn't call, didn't explain, and neither did he, as if they had both quietly agreed to rewrite history in their own favor. And I watched from the outside as they became them. The Instagram smiles, the soft focus love, the captions about fate and timing, and when you know, you know. And I wanted to scream, not because I was heartbroken but because I was erased, replaced, discarded like a version of the story that didn't test well with the audience. And I thought, fine, if I no longer exist I can do anything, I can be anything. And so I became patient, still, careful. I collected things, kept receipts, not just the literal kind, but all the little betrayals that had piled up like dust in the corners of our shared apartment, the lies told softly, the looks exchanged when they thought I wasn't watching, the weekend trips that didn't add up. And when the wedding was announced I laughed, not because it was funny but because it was inevitable, the final act of their theater, the bow before the curtain call. And I waited. Not out of bitterness but precision, because timing, I've learned, is everything. And when the wedding photos were published, her in that ivory gown that didn't suit her, him with the same crooked tie I once fixed on the morning of his first big promotion, I downloaded them quietly, all of them, and wrote the email not as a woman scorned but as a witness to something unethical, inappropriate, worthy of scrutiny, because love may be private but workplace policy is not. And I knew about the firm's code of conduct, knew what they said about interoffice relationships, especially with interns. And I sent it not out of vengeance but because I wanted to tell the truth finally to someone who mattered. And what followed was not fireworks or collapse, but silence. A beautiful, deafening silence like snowfall after a storm. And weeks later I heard whispers through a friend of a friend that he was placed on indefinite leave. That HR had questions, that her position offer had been rescinded quietly, no drama, just the slow administrative dismantling of their new life together. And I didn't celebrate, didn't gloat, didn't even tell anyone, not because I wasn't proud, but because some victories are meant to be kept like fine china, rarely used, always treasured. And I walked away from it all lighter, not because I had healed, but because I had spoken in the only language the world seems to respect, consequence. And though they may never understand why I did it, though they may call me vindictive or cold or dramatic, I know the truth. I loved him honestly, deeply, in a way neither of them is capable of, and I lost everything. But not my name, not my dignity, and certainly not my silence. And in the end that is more than they'll ever have, because love built on betrayal is a house without a foundation. And sooner or later it always sinks.